They lived together for 50 years, building a life filled with love, memories, and unbreakable trust. Or so she thought. When Margaret lost her beloved husband, William, she believed she knew everything about the man she had spent decades by his side. But 10 years after his passing, a single letter arrives, one that should have never existed. A revelation buried for over half a century threatens to unravel everything she held dear. What was William hiding? And why, even in death, is his past still chasing her? The truth is far more shocking than she could have ever imagined. Stay until the end to uncover a mystery that will leave you speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. Now let's dive into the story. Margaret sat in her small but cozy living room, staring at the old wooden clock on the wall. It had been 10 years since William passed away, and yet, not a day went by without her thinking of him. The house still smelled faintly of his favorite coffee, and his worn-out chair in the corner remained untouched, as if waiting for him to return. The silence was both comforting and suffocating. She often found herself talking to him, whispering into the still air, pretending he was listening. But today, something was different. There was a weight in the air, a feeling she couldn't shake. It wasn't just another lonely afternoon. The knock on the door was abrupt and unexpected. Margaret wasn't expecting visitors. Slowly, she rose from her chair, her joints protesting with every movement, and shuffled toward the door. When she opened it, she was met with a young man in an official-looking uniform. His face was solemn, his posture stiff. She recognized the insignia on his jacket. It was from the United States Army. A strange chill ran through her. "Mrs. Thompson?" he asked, his voice measured, almost hesitant. "Yes," she answered, gripping the doorframe for support. The man pulled a thick envelope from his bag and handed it to her. This was recently declassified. It was meant to be delivered a long time ago. "I'm sorry for the delay." Margaret stared at the envelope in his hand, but she didn't move to take it. The words United States Army were stamped on the front, along with William's full name. The paper looked old, yellowed with time, as if it had been sitting in some forgotten drawer for decades. Her heart pounded against her ribs. "This must be a mistake," she murmured. "My husband, he's been gone for 10 years. The man nodded. "I understand, ma'am, but this letter was written for you. It belonged to your husband." Her hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. It was thick, heavier than she expected. She could feel the outline of something inside, documents, perhaps. She looked up at the man again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know what this is about?" His expression softened. "I don't, ma'am. My job is only to deliver it. But if you need assistance, there's a number inside you can call." Margaret swallowed hard, nodding. She clutched the envelope to her chest as she watched him walk away, his boots clicking against the pavement. The moment he disappeared down the street, she shut the door and locked it, leaning against the wood for support. The silence in the house had changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was filled with anticipation, fear, and something Margaret hadn't felt in a long time: uncertainty. She walked back to her chair, her fingers gripping the edges of the envelope tightly. For years, she believed she knew every part of William's life. They had built a home together, raised a family, shared joys and sorrows. There were no secrets between them. At least that was what she had always thought. But this, whatever was inside this envelope, it felt like a door opening to a past she never knew existed. She hesitated before tearing it open. Her breath was unsteady, her pulse erratic. Carefully, she pulled out the contents. A letter, old, delicate, written in William's handwriting. But there was more, a stack of official-looking papers, some with red stamps, others with dates that went back more than 70 years. And then, a photograph. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The photo was black and white, slightly faded, but she recognized William immediately. He was younger, standing with a group of men in uniform. But there was something unsettling about the image. The way he stood, the look in his eyes, he wasn't smiling like he used to in their family pictures. He looked serious, almost haunted. Her fingers traced over his face. William, what is this? She turned to the letter, her heart hammering as she unfolded it. William's handwriting was familiar, but the words on the page made no sense. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then the past has finally caught up to me. There are things I never told you, things I never wanted you to know, but I see now that the truth has a way of finding its way back. I can only hope that when you learn everything, you can forgive me. Margaret's hands shook as she read further. I was not the man you believed me to be. I wanted to be. God knows I tried. But before I was your husband, before I built a life with you, I was someone else. And that past, it never really let me go. Her vision blurred with tears. The room felt like it was spinning. She gripped the armrest of her chair, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This couldn't be happening. Not after all these years. Not William. Her eyes darted back to the official documents, trying to make sense of them. Some were reports, some were letters between military officials. There was one document with William's name, followed by words that made her stomach drop. Operation Seraphim, classified personnel files. Subject: William Thompson, alias James Whitaker. Alias? What did that mean? She clutched the letter to her chest, her mind racing. Had William been living under a false identity? Had he lied to her their entire marriage? But why? Why would he keep something like this from her? Her breath came in ragged gasps as she forced herself to read further. I never wanted you to find out like this. If I could, I would have taken these secrets to my grave. But if you are reading this now, it means someone else has started asking questions. And if they found you, it's because they know who I was. And they want you to know, too. Margaret's blood ran cold. The air in the room felt suffocating. She glanced toward the window, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable. Had someone been watching her? She forced herself to keep reading. You may be contacted by people who claim to know the truth. Some of them might tell you I was a hero. Others will say I was a traitor. The truth is, I don't even know what I was anymore. But what I did, what we did, we thought we were doing the right thing. And yet, the consequences followed me for the rest of my life. And now they've come for you. Margaret gasped, dropping the letter as if it burned her fingers. The words blurred on the page, but she couldn't bring herself to pick it up again. Her mind reeled with questions, but one thought screamed louder than the rest. Who was William Thompson? And if she never truly knew her husband, then who had she spent 50 years of her life with? Margaret's chest tightened, and a deep, aching sorrow settled in her bones. She had thought grief was something she had conquered long ago, that she had come to terms with William's passing. But now, a new grief took hold of her, one far worse than death. It was the grief of realizing that the man she had loved, the man she had trusted beyond all else, had been a stranger all along. She wasn't sure how long she sat there, staring at the papers scattered across her lap. But one thing was certain. She needed answers, and she would not stop until she found them. The night stretched endlessly, wrapping Margaret in an eerie silence she had never noticed before. The house that once felt warm and familiar now seemed foreign, filled with shadows that carried the weight of a past she never knew existed. She sat in her chair, the letter resting on her trembling lap, her eyes moving over the words again and again, as if reading them enough times would change their meaning. But the truth remained. William had lived a life she had never known. He had secrets buried deeper than she could have ever imagined. And now, 10 years after his passing, those secrets had found their way to her doorstep. She reached for the documents again, her fingers stiff with apprehension. The military reports were filled with technical jargon, references to missions she had never heard of, and names that meant nothing to her. But one thing stood out: William's alias. James Whitaker. It didn't even sound like him. Felt like she was reading about a stranger. She traced her fingers over his name on the page, whispering under her breath, "Why, William? Why didn't you tell me?" The air in the room felt heavy, pressing against her chest. She needed answers, but where would she even begin? The only person who could explain everything was gone. And even if he were alive, would he have told her the truth? Or would he have continued to smile, to hold her hand, to whisper sweet nothings in her ear, all while keeping this part of himself locked away. The thought sent a sharp pang through her heart. She pulled the photograph closer. The men in the picture stood shoulder to shoulder, their expressions hard, their uniforms crisp. But it was William's face that caught her attention the most. His eyes. They weren't the eyes of the man who had kissed her goodnight for 50 years. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much. Her breathing grew uneven. Was it possible that the life she had lived, the love she had cherished, was built on a foundation of lies? A sudden knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Margaret's heart pounded. The sound was too sharp, too unexpected. She hesitated for a moment, glancing at the clock. It was past midnight. Who would be visiting her at this hour? She rose to her feet slowly, gripping the back of her chair for support. Her mind raced. The letter had warned her that someone might come looking for her. Could this be them? She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She was being ridiculous. It was probably just a neighbor, or maybe she had left a light on and someone was checking on her. Gathering her courage, she walked to the door, her fingers trembling as she reached for the knob. She opened it just a crack. A man stood on her porch, dressed in dark clothing, his expression unreadable. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old either, somewhere in his late 50s, perhaps. His hair was neatly combed, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. "Mrs. Thompson?" His voice was low, careful. Margaret stiffened. "Who are you?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced around as if making sure they were alone. "May I come in?" Margaret's grip on the door tightened. "I don't know who you are." The man nodded, his jaw tightening. "I understand, but I think we need to talk. It's about your husband." Margaret's breath hitched. She hesitated, her mind screaming at her to shut the door, to lock it, to pretend this conversation never started. But then she remembered the letter, the photograph, the name James Whittaker. If this man had answers, could she afford to turn him away? She swallowed hard, then stepped aside. "Come in." The man entered cautiously, glancing around the living room as if expecting to see someone else. Margaret led him to the small sitting area, motioning for him to take a seat. "Who are you?" she asked again, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "My name is Henry Lawson," he said, lowering himself onto the couch. "I knew your husband a long time ago." Margaret sat across from him, studying his face. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. "How did you know him?" Henry exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his chin. "The same way the men in that photograph did. We served together." Margaret's heart clenched. "Then tell me the truth. Who was he? Was William? Was he really James Whittaker?" Henry's gaze darkened. "Yes." A sharp, painful silence filled the room. Margaret's hands clenched into fists. "Why did he lie to me? Why did he keep this from me?" Henry hesitated before answering. "Because he was trying to protect you." Margaret let out a bitter laugh, though it held no humor. "Protect me? From what?" Henry leaned forward slightly, his expression grave. "From the past, Mrs. Thompson. From the people who would want to find him. And now, from the people who might come looking for you." A chill ran down Margaret's spine. "You mean the military?" "No," Henry said, his voice steady. "Something worse." Margaret's mind reeled. She looked at the documents on the table, at William's name or James Whittaker's name, staring back at her. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest. "What did he do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry's expression was unreadable. He was part of something classified, a mission that was never supposed to exist, a mission that changed everything. Margaret's pulse pounded. "And now that mission has come back for me?" Henry hesitated. "It's possible. You were never supposed to know, but someone decided it was time you did. And that means someone else knows, too." Margaret looked toward the window, her reflection barely visible in the darkness outside. For 50 years, she had lived in a world she thought was safe, a world she thought she understood. But now, that world was unraveling, and she wasn't sure what would be left when the truth was finally exposed. She turned back to Henry, her voice firm. "I want to know everything." Henry studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Then you need to be prepared. Because once you know the truth, there's no going back." Margaret straightened her shoulders. "I've already lost him once. I can survive whatever comes next." Henry exhaled, rubbing his hands together. "Then let's start at the beginning." Margaret sat still, her breath steady, her hands folded in her lap. She had spent 10 years mourning a man she thought she knew. But now she was ready to unearth the past, ready to discover the truth. And no matter what she found, she knew she could never look at William the same way again. The air in the living room felt heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Margaret sat across from Henry, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the armrest of her chair. The silence between them stretched, unyielding, filled with anticipation. She had spent 50 years believing she knew every part of William, believing their love had been built on a foundation of trust and honesty. But now, as she looked at the man sitting before her, a man who claimed to know a version of William she had never met, she felt the walls of her carefully constructed reality begin to crack. Henry leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. His gaze was steady but filled with something Margaret couldn't quite place. Was it regret? Caution? Or was it something deeper, something closer to fear? "Before I tell you everything," Henry said slowly, "I need you to understand something. William James, he wasn't a bad man. He was trying to do what he thought was right." Margaret's breath hitched. The way Henry said it sounded like a warning, like an apology for something she wasn't ready to hear. "Just tell me the truth," she whispered. "I deserve to know." Henry exhaled, nodding. "It started after the war. We were part of a classified operation, one that was meant to stay buried forever. Officially, it doesn't exist. But the men involved, we never forgot." Margaret's fingers dug into the fabric of her dress. "What was the operation?" Henry hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Project Seraphim." The name sent a strange chill down her spine. It sounded ominous, like something that had been whispered about in dark rooms and hidden behind locked doors. "It wasn't just another mission," Henry continued. "It was an experiment, something we never should have been a part of." Margaret's heartbeat quickened. "An experiment?" Henry nodded. "It was supposed to be about intelligence gathering, about staying one step ahead. But somewhere along the way, it became something else. Something dangerous." Margaret's stomach twisted. "And William James, what was his role?" Henry swallowed hard. "He was one of the few who tried to stop it." Margaret blinked. "Stop it?" Henry rubbed a hand over his face. "We didn't realize what we were getting into at first. We were soldiers. We followed orders. But James, he started asking questions. Questions that made the wrong people nervous. When he figured out the truth, he knew he had to get out. But walking away wasn't an option. Not for any of us." Margaret felt her throat tighten. "So he changed his name. He ran." Henry nodded. "He wasn't the only one. Some of us managed to disappear to build new lives. Others, they weren't so lucky." Margaret's hands clenched into fists. "Why now? Why is this coming back after all these years?" Henry hesitated. "Because someone has started looking again. Someone has been digging into Project Seraphim. And if they found you, if they sent you that letter, it means they know James was involved. It means they know who he really was." Margaret swallowed hard, her mind racing. "But William James, he's been gone for a decade. Why would they care now?" Henry's expression darkened. "Because there's something still missing. Something they think he left behind." Margaret frowned. "What do you mean?" Henry leaned back slightly. "There was a file. Something James took with him when he disappeared. A file that contained everything, the truth about what really happened. We always assumed he destroyed it. But if someone is searching for you now, it means they think it still exists. And if they think you have it..." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. She thought back to the envelope, to the documents inside, to the words William had written. "If you are reading this, then the past has finally caught up to me." Had he been trying to warn her? Had he known this moment would come? She pushed herself up from the chair, her body moving before her mind could catch up. She walked to the old cabinet in the corner of the room, her fingers tracing over the wood. She hesitated only a moment before pulling the doors open. Inside, among old photo albums and forgotten trinkets, was a small wooden box. It was one of William's most treasured possessions, something he had never let anyone touch. Her hands shook as she pulled it out, setting it gently on the coffee table. Henry's eyes widened slightly. "You think it's in there?" Margaret exhaled shakily. "I don't know, but it's the only thing of his I never opened." She reached for the latch, her breath catching in her throat. The metal was cold against her fingertips. Slowly, carefully, she lifted the lid. Inside there were letters, dozens of them, all in William's handwriting. Margaret's fingers hovered over them before she picked up the first envelope. It was addressed to her. She swallowed hard, tearing it open with unsteady hands. The paper was fragile, the ink slightly faded, but the words were clear. "My dearest Margaret, if you have found this, then it means I was right. It means they have come looking, and it means I am no longer here to protect you. I am sorry. I am sorry for the secrets, for the lies, for the life I built on a foundation of half-truths. But most of all, I am sorry that I left you with the burden of knowing. There is a file, Margaret, one that I took when I ran, one that they will never stop searching for. I wanted to destroy it, but I couldn't, not without ensuring the truth would never be forgotten. If you are reading this, it means the choice is now yours. Do you destroy it, or do you uncover the past? Whatever you decide, know that I have always loved you, and that love, our love, was the only truth I never had to hide." Margaret's vision blurred with tears. Her fingers clutched the paper, her heart aching in a way she hadn't felt in years. She looked up at Henry, her voice barely a whisper. "The file. He had it all along." Henry's jaw tightened. "Then we need to find it, before they do." Margaret nodded, wiping at her tears. She had spent 10 years mourning a man she thought she knew. But now, she wasn't just mourning him. She was uncovering him. And she wasn't sure if she was ready for what she would find. Margaret sat frozen in her chair, William's letter still trembling in her fingers. The words burned into her mind, looping over and over again, filling her with an overwhelming mixture of grief, disbelief, and something else. Something she couldn't quite name yet. Fear? No, it was deeper than fear. It was the realization that her entire life had been built on a story that was only half true. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. For decades, she had believed in the simplicity of love. She had believed in William, but now, the man she had loved for 50 years had become a stranger to her. A puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve but knew she had no choice. Across from her, Henry watched her closely, his expression unreadable. He had given her time to process, but now he leaned forward, his voice steady. "Margaret, I know this is a lot, but if William, if James, left behind that file, then you are in more danger than you realize." Margaret inhaled sharply, her gaze flicking up to him. Danger. The word felt foreign on her tongue, misplaced in the world she had lived in for so long. Henry nodded. "If someone sent you that letter, if they know you exist, it means they're still looking. And if they think you have the file..." He hesitated. "They won't stop." Margaret swallowed hard. "I don't even know where it is." Henry exhaled. "Then we need to start looking. That file could contain everything, the truth about Project Seraphim, about what really happened back then. If William kept it, he must have hidden it somewhere safe." Margaret's fingers tightened around the edge of William's letter. He had written, "If you are reading this, the choice is now yours." But how was she supposed to make a choice when she didn't even know what she was choosing between? She reached for the wooden box again, sifting through the letters. They were all addressed to her, each sealed, each marked with a different date. Carefully, she pulled one out at random and opened it. "Margaret, I don't know how to tell you this, so I won't. Not yet. But there are things I have done, things I have seen that I cannot escape. Some nights, I wake up and I forget who I am. I forget that I am William Thompson, your husband, the man who loves you. Instead, I remember James Whittaker, and I am afraid that one day you will see that part of me. And when you do, I am afraid you will never look at me the same way again." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The words felt like a dagger, twisting deep. She had always sensed something in William, even in their happiest years. A quiet sadness, a weight he carried. There were nights when he had sat in the dark, staring at nothing, lost in thoughts he never shared. She had always assumed it was the war, the things he had seen, the things they all tried to forget. But it was more than that. He had been living two lives, and now she was left to piece them together. She looked up at Henry, her voice steadier than she expected. "If William hid this file, it wasn't here. He would have never put me in danger like that." Henry nodded. "Then we need to think like him. Where would he have kept something this important?" Margaret thought for a moment, her mind drifting through the years, through the places William had loved, the places he had trusted. And then suddenly she knew. The cabin. Henry frowned. "What cabin?" Margaret's heart pounded. William had a cabin. It was in the mountains, secluded. He always said it was his place to clear his head. He would go there alone sometimes. "I never questioned it." She swallowed. But what if he wasn't just going there to think? Henry's gaze sharpened. "Do you still know where it is?" Margaret hesitated before nodding. "Yes, it's been years, but I remember the way." Henry exhaled. "Then that's where we start." Margaret stood, her knees slightly unsteady, but there was determination in her posture. She had spent 10 years mourning William, believing their story had ended. But now she realized her part in the story was only just beginning. The drive to the cabin was long, the winding roads unfamiliar in the darkness. Henry had insisted they leave immediately, warning that if they had thought of the cabin, someone else might as well. Margaret's mind raced as she stared out the window, the shadows of the trees stretching long under the dim moonlight. Memories of William flooded back to her. The way he would disappear for a few days at a time, always coming back looking more at peace, as if he had locked away whatever haunted him. She had always respected his need for solitude, believing it was part of who he was. But now she wondered, had she been blind? Had she ignored the signs? The cabin appeared in the distance, its small, wooden structure barely visible through the trees. It looked untouched, exactly as she remembered. A wave of nostalgia mixed with unease settled in her chest. Henry parked the car and stepped out first, scanning the area. "Stay close," he said quietly. Margaret followed him, her fingers tightening around the edges of her coat. The air smelled of pine and earth, of time standing still. She pulled the key from her pocket, the same one William had given her decades ago, though she had never used it. She slid it into the lock, twisting. The door creaked open. Dust filled the air as they stepped inside. The cabin was small, just one room with a fireplace, a cot, and a small wooden table. It was exactly as she remembered, but now she looked at it with new eyes. "Start looking," Henry said. Margaret moved to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines of old books, looking for something out of place. Henry knelt by the floorboards, testing them for loose panels. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. Frustration built in Margaret's chest. What if they were wrong? What if there was nothing here? She turned, her gaze sweeping the room, desperate for an answer. Then her eyes landed on something. A small, rusted box near the fireplace. Her breath caught. She walked toward it, kneeling as she lifted the lid. Inside, there were more letters, more documents, and at the very bottom, wrapped carefully in cloth, was a single manila folder. She pulled it out slowly, her hands shaking. It was marked with a single word: Seraphim. Henry leaned over her shoulder, his expression unreadable. "You found it." Margaret swallowed hard. She looked down at the file, at the weight of it in her hands. William had left this for her. He had spent his whole life protecting her from it. And now it was up to her to decide what happened next. Margaret sat motionless, staring at the manila folder in her trembling hands. Seraphim. The word alone felt heavy, as if it carried the weight of something dark, something meant to stay buried. Dust clung to the edges of the folder, the paper brittle with time. Whatever was inside had been hidden for decades, waiting for this exact moment, for her hands to open it, for her eyes to see the truth. Henry stood beside her, silent, his expression tense. He didn't push her, didn't rush her. He knew, just as she did, that once she opened this folder, there would be no going back. The past would no longer be a mystery. It would be a reality she would have to live with. Margaret exhaled shakily. William kept this from me for a reason. Henry nodded. Yes, but he also left it behind for a reason. She swallowed hard, her fingers hesitating at the edge of the folder. A part of her wanted to put it back, to leave the past where it belonged, to remember William as the man she had loved, not as the man whose name she had never truly known. But the other part of her, the part that had lived in doubt since the moment that letter arrived, knew she could not. Slowly, carefully, she opened it. The first thing she saw was a photograph, black and white, slightly curled at the edges. A group of men in uniform, William, James Whittaker, stood in the middle, younger, his face serious, his eyes shadowed. She had seen the same photo before in the envelope from the army, but now she noticed something new. The men around him, their expressions. Some of them were smiling, others looked grim. But it wasn't just their faces that unsettled her. It was what was written on the back. For those we lost, and for those who can never know. Margaret's breath hitched. The phrase was eerily similar to what William had written in his letter. She set the photograph aside, forcing herself to continue. Beneath it were several typed pages, faded but still legible. She picked up the first one. Project Seraphim, classified report. Her eyes moved rapidly over the words, her pulse quickening with every line. 1946. The end of the war left many unanswered questions. Intelligence operations continued in secrecy, protecting national security at all costs. A specialized unit was formed, consisting of elite personnel, chosen for their skills in deception, infiltration, and psychological warfare. Their mission was simple: remain unseen. Their existence untraceable. Their actions deniable. Margaret's hands tightened around the paper. She turned the page, her stomach twisting. Not all operatives agreed with the nature of their assignments. Some questioned orders. Some attempted to walk away. Those who did were handled accordingly. Her breath faltered. James Whittaker was identified as an at-risk operative. His departure from the program was unauthorized. Extreme caution is advised should he resurface. Any knowledge he retains is to be neutralized immediately. Margaret's blood ran cold. She read the words again, hoping she had misunderstood. Neutralized immediately. She looked up at Henry, her voice shaking. They wanted him dead. Henry's face was grim. Yes. Margaret's mind reeled. But why? What did he know? Henry hesitated. Then he reached for another document from the folder, handing it to her. Read this. She took it, her hands unsteady. The page was different from the others. Handwritten notes scribbled in the margins, William's handwriting unmistakable. It was never about national security. It was about control, about making sure the wrong people never talked. I saw what they did. I saw who they hurt, and when I refused to be a part of it, I became the enemy. Margaret's throat tightened. The room around her blurred, her vision swimming with tears. I ran because I had no choice, but I knew one day they'd come looking, and if they found me, they'd find you too. That's why I hid this. That's why I kept you safe. But if you are reading this, Margaret, then I failed. A choked sob escaped her lips. Henry's voice was quiet. He wasn't just running from the past. He was running from them. Margaret clenched her hands into fists, and they never stopped looking. Henry nodded. Which means we don't have much time. Margaret's mind raced. If William had spent his entire life keeping this secret, why would someone come looking for it now? What had changed? Had someone found out he had left the file behind? Had someone been watching her? She thought of the army officer who had delivered the letter. The way he had looked at her. The way he had hesitated when she asked if he knew what it was about. A sick feeling crept into her stomach. "What if they already know I have this?" she whispered. Henry's expression darkened. "Then you're in danger." Margaret's heart pounded. The house she had lived in for decades, the home she had built with William, suddenly felt like a trap. She grabbed the rest of the documents, shoving them back into the folder. "We can't stay here." Henry nodded in agreement. "We need to leave. Now." Margaret took one last look around the cabin. The walls that once held memories of love and solitude now felt suffocating, tainted with the ghosts of secrets she never should have uncovered. She turned to Henry. "Where do we go?" He exhaled. "Somewhere safe. But first, we need to figure out what they don't want us to know." Margaret clutched the file tightly, her mind spinning. She had spent 10 years mourning a man she thought she knew. But now, she realized the man she had loved had spent his entire life protecting her from the truth. And now that truth was coming for her. Margaret had spent a lifetime building a world she believed was safe. A life wrapped in the warmth of love, in the certainty that she had known the man who shared her days and whispered goodnight every evening for 50 years. But now, sitting in the dim glow of the cabin, clutching the classified file that had shattered everything she thought she knew, she realized that her world had never been real. It had been a carefully woven illusion, crafted by a man who had spent his life running from ghosts that never stopped chasing him. And now they were chasing her, too. Henry moved swiftly, gathering the documents, checking the windows for movement outside. The cabin had been still, untouched for years, but now Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were listening, that the very air held its breath, waiting for something or someone to find them. She rose to her feet, the ache in her joints forgotten under the weight of adrenaline. "We can't stay here." Henry nodded. "No. If they've been looking for this file, they'll trace it back to you eventually. And when they do, they'll look here." Margaret felt a cold shudder run down her spine. The idea of someone breaking into this place, searching through the memories William had left behind, sent a wave of nausea through her. This cabin had been his refuge. Now it was nothing more than a target. She clutched the folder tighter. "Where do we go?" Henry exhaled, thinking. "Somewhere they won't expect. We need time to go through the rest of this, to figure out what's in here that's so important." Margaret hesitated. "What if we just destroy it?" Henry looked at her sharply. "And let them win?" "Margaret, this file, it's more than just William's past. It's evidence. Proof of something they've spent decades covering up. If you burn it, it's gone. And everything he risked, everything he ran from, it'll be like it never happened." Margaret's fingers tightened around the folder. She thought of William's words. "The choice is now yours." She had spent so much time mourning him, trying to hold onto the pieces of the man she thought she knew. But now, she realized she had been holding onto a shadow. The real William, the real James Whittaker, had left her with this, with the truth, and she couldn't turn her back on it. She squared her shoulders. "Then we find out what's inside, and we make sure it was worth it." Henry gave a small nod of approval. "Then we move now." They didn't take much. Just the folder, a few essentials. Margaret locked the cabin behind her, even though she knew it wouldn't stop anyone determined enough to break in. As she and Henry stepped out into the night, the cold air pressing against her skin, she glanced back one last time, a silent farewell to the place William had once called his sanctuary. The drive was silent, the road stretching endlessly before them. Margaret's hands were folded in her lap, the file resting between them. She wanted to open it, to devour every word, but part of her feared what she would find. Henry seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't have to read it all at once." Margaret exhaled. "I need to know." She flipped open another section of the file, scanning the pages. Reports, transcripts, notes scribbled in William's handwriting. But then something stood out. A name, Samuel Porter. Margaret frowned. This name, it's been mentioned before. Henry glanced over. "Samuel Porter?" She nodded. "William James, he wrote it in his letters. He said he wasn't the only one who ran, that others disappeared. Henry's expression darkened. Porter was one of us. One of the first to go underground. Margaret looked up sharply. You knew him? Henry's grip on the wheel tightened. I did, but I thought he was dead. Margaret's heart pounded. What if he's not? Henry was silent for a moment, considering. If Porter is alive, he might have more answers. He knew more about Seraphim than anyone. If William was trying to protect something, Porter might know what. Margaret turned the page. There was an address. An old one, faded with time, but it was something. Henry glanced at it, then nodded. We go there. Margaret's stomach twisted. She had barely begun to understand what William had been running from. Now, she was chasing the very past he had spent his life trying to escape. The next few hours passed in tense silence. The road stretched before them, winding through empty highways and forgotten towns. Margaret's hands clenched and unclenched in her lap. She had spent years believing her life had already been written, that the greatest moments of love and loss had come and gone. But now, she felt like she was standing at the edge of something unknown, something she couldn't turn away from. By the time they arrived at the address, the first traces of dawn were creeping over the horizon. The house was small, run down, its paint peeling, its windows dark. There was no sign of life. Margaret hesitated. What if he's not here? Henry's jaw tightened. Then we find out where he went. They stepped out of the car, the early morning air crisp against Margaret's skin. Henry knocked on the door. Nothing. Then, after a long pause, the sound of movement inside. Margaret's pulse quickened. A moment later, the door creaked open. An old man stood there, his face lined with time, his eyes sharp with suspicion. He looked between them, then settled his gaze on Henry. Didn't think I'd see you again. Henry exhaled. Neither did I, Porter. Margaret's breath caught. Samuel Porter. He looked past Henry, his gaze landing on Margaret. He studied her for a moment, then his eyes dropped to the folder clutched in her hands. Slowly, his expression changed. Recognition. You're James' wife, he said quietly. Margaret's throat tightened. I was. Porter stared at her for a long moment, then stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in. She followed Henry inside, her heart pounding. The house was small, cluttered with old papers and books, a life spent in hiding. Porter shut the door behind them, then turned, his gaze serious. If you're here, he said, then it means you found what James left behind. Margaret nodded. I need to know the truth. Porter sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. The truth. He let out a bitter chuckle. The truth got us killed, Margaret. It got James killed. And if you're not careful, it'll get you killed, too. Margaret felt a chill settle deep in her bones. For years, she had believed William's death had been ordinary, a man passing from natural causes after a long life. But now, as she stood in the dim light of Samuel Porter's house, she realized the terrifying truth. William hadn't just been running from the past. The past had finally caught up to him, and now it was coming for her. Margaret felt her breath catch in her throat as the weight of Porter's words settled over her. The truth got us killed. It got James killed. And if you're not careful, it'll get you killed, too. The room seemed to shrink around her, the air thick with something unspoken, something dangerous. For a brief moment, she wished she had never opened the envelope, never found the file, never questioned the man she had spent 50 years loving. But it was too late for that now. The truth was here, pressing down on her like a force she could no longer ignore. She looked at Porter, studying the deep lines carved into his face. He was old now, weary, but there was still something sharp in his eyes, something that told her he had spent years looking over his shoulder, never truly safe. Margaret's voice was steady, though her hands trembled. Tell me everything. Porter exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He looked at Henry, then back at Margaret. You sure you're ready for that? Margaret's fingers tightened around the file. I spent 50 years believing I knew my husband, but I didn't. I don't want to live another day without knowing who he really was. Porter studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. He gestured for her to sit. Margaret lowered herself into a worn-out chair, her pulse drumming in her ears. Henry remained standing, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Porter settled into the chair across from her, his gaze distant, as if he was seeing something far away, something buried deep in the past. James and I were part of something we never should have been involved in. Project Seraphim was more than just an intelligence operation. It was about control. And once we realized what that meant, we became liabilities. Margaret swallowed hard. Control of what? Porter hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. People, governments, information. Seraphim wasn't just about gathering intelligence, it was about rewriting narratives. Making sure the right people stayed in power, making sure the wrong people disappeared. It was about influence, manipulation. And James, he was one of the best operatives they had. Until he wasn't. Margaret's stomach twisted. What changed? Porter sighed. James had a conscience. That's what changed. His eyes darkened. He started questioning things. Started asking about the missions, about the people we were watching, the decisions being made in the shadows. And once you start asking questions, Margaret, you become a problem. Margaret could barely process the words. So they tried to silence him? Porter nodded. We were given an assignment, one that crossed the line. James refused. He tried to walk away. That was his mistake. You don't walk away from Seraphim. Not unless they let you. Margaret's hands were ice cold. So he ran. Porter exhaled slowly. He didn't just run. He took something with him. Something they never forgave him for. Margaret's breath caught. The file. Porter's eyes flickered with something unreadable. That file contains the last loose ends of Project Seraphim. The things they thought had been erased, covered up. The names of the people who pulled the strings. The decisions they made. The evidence they never wanted to surface. Margaret felt her pulse pound in her ears. And now they think I have it. Porter leaned back, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Not just think. They know. A heavy silence filled the room. Margaret's heart thudded in her chest. She had spent her entire life believing she was just a wife, just a woman who had loved her husband deeply, simply. But now, she was caught in something far bigger than herself. A game she didn't understand. A war she had never signed up for. She forced herself to breathe. If they know I have it, what happens next? Porter's expression turned grim. They'll come for you. Margaret's hands clenched into fists. Then we don't give them the chance. Henry's eyes snapped to hers, surprise flickering across his face. Margaret! But she wasn't backing down. She had spent 10 years mourning a man she never truly knew. She had spent her entire life trusting that love was enough, that the past was the past, that the world was simple. But it wasn't. And now, she was going to finish what William started. She met Porter's gaze. Tell me how we use this file against them. Porter hesitated, then sighed. There's a journalist, someone James trusted. If we can get this file to her, if she can expose what's inside, it'll be too big to bury. Margaret nodded. Then that's what we do. Henry looked at her, his voice firm. Are you sure? Once this is out, there's no undoing it. Margaret exhaled, steadying herself. I've spent my entire life believing lies. It's time the truth comes out. Porter studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. Then we better move fast. Margaret stood, the file clutched tightly in her hands. She had spent years thinking her story was over, that she had already lived the greatest chapters of her life. But now she realized her real story was just beginning, and no matter what it took, she would finish it. Margaret sat in the dimly lit room, the file still clutched in her hands as if it contained the last remnants of William himself. She could feel the weight of it, decades of buried secrets, of choices made in the dark, of lives altered by decisions that had never been meant for the light of day. The truth was here, in her grasp, and yet, knowing it didn't make her feel any safer. Across from her, Porter watched her with a quiet intensity, his fingers tapping against the table as if measuring time, as if counting down to something inevitable. Henry stood near the window, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the street outside. They were waiting, though none of them dared to say it out loud. Waiting for the past to catch up to them. Margaret exhaled slowly, forcing her thoughts to settle. "You said there's a journalist," she said, her voice steady. "Someone William trusted. Who is she?" Porter leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Her name is Evelyn Carter. She's not just any journalist. She's been investigating buried military operations for years. She knows how deep this goes. If we get this file to her, she'll know exactly what to do with it." Margaret nodded, gripping the folder tighter. "Where is she?" Porter hesitated. "That's the problem. The last time I had contact with her was months ago. She was working on something big, something tied to Seraphim. And then she disappeared." Margaret's heart sank. "Disappeared?" Porter nodded grimly. "Not a trace. No messages. No articles. Nothing. Either she went underground to protect herself, or someone made sure she couldn't keep digging." Margaret swallowed hard. "And if it's the latter?" Porter sighed. "Then we need to find her before they do." A silence settled between them. Margaret felt her pulse quicken. For years, she had lived a life of quiet certainty, believing she understood the world, believing that the man she loved had been exactly who he claimed to be. Now, she was standing at the edge of something vast, something terrifying. And yet, she couldn't stop. Henry finally turned from the window, his voice low. "If we're going after her, we need to move now." Margaret nodded. "Then let's go." The decision was made. The drive was long, the silence in the car heavy. Margaret stared out the window, her thoughts racing. The name Evelyn Carter echoed in her mind. If this woman had been investigating Seraphim, if she had uncovered something dangerous enough to make her vanish, then Margaret had no choice but to assume she was in danger as well. Henry drove with a steady focus, his hands tight around the wheel. Porter sat in the passenger seat, flipping through his old notes, occasionally muttering to himself. Margaret glanced at him. "What are you looking for?" Porter didn't look up. "Patterns. Connections. If Evelyn was getting too close, we need to figure out what she was looking at." Margaret frowned. "And if we do?" Porter exhaled. "Then we'll know exactly what they don't want us to find." Margaret's fingers tightened in her lap. They reached the city by nightfall. The streets were alive, glowing with neon signs and headlights, the hum of life masking the tension curling in Margaret's chest. They parked a few blocks away from where Evelyn had last been seen, an old apartment complex that now stood silent, its windows dark. Margaret hesitated as they stepped onto the sidewalk. If she was taken, is this safe? Henry glanced at her. Nothing about this is safe anymore. They moved carefully, keeping to the shadows. Porter led them up the side stairwell, his movements precise, practiced. Margaret followed, her breath steady despite the pounding in her chest. The apartment door was locked. Porter didn't hesitate. He pulled out a set of tools, and within seconds, the lock clicked open. He pushed the door inward cautiously. The room was dark, undisturbed. Dust clung to the air, the scent of abandonment thick. Papers were scattered across a desk, a half-empty cup of coffee sitting forgotten beside them. It was as if Evelyn had simply stepped out one day and never returned. Margaret's stomach twisted. She didn't leave willingly. Henry moved toward the desk, sifting through the papers. Porter checked the closets, the bathroom. "No signs of struggle," he murmured. "No forced entry. Whoever took her, they knew what they were doing." Margaret stepped closer to the desk, her eyes scanning the documents. Then she froze. There, on top of a pile of notes, was a photograph, a black and white image of William. Her breath caught. She reached for it with trembling fingers, staring at the man she had loved, the man she had mourned. His expression was unreadable, his posture tense. The date on the back was from years before his death. "He met her," she whispered. Porter turned sharply. "What?" Margaret lifted the photo. "Evelyn. She met him. She spoke to him before he died." Henry's expression darkened. "Then she knew more than we thought." Margaret turned the photo over, scanning the back. Below the date, there was a single line of text, hastily scrawled in pen. "He told me to keep looking. He said it wasn't over. A chill ran down Margaret's spine. Porter exhaled. Then we're not just looking for Evelyn. His voice was steady but grim. We're looking for whatever she found. Margaret swallowed hard. The weight of it all pressed against her. William's secrets, Evelyn's disappearance, the danger that now followed her every step. But she didn't falter. She had spent 50 years loving a man she thought she knew. Now, she was chasing his ghost, uncovering the truth he had died protecting. And no matter what lay ahead, she would not stop until she knew everything. Margaret's hands trembled as she turned the photograph over again, her fingers tracing the words written in Evelyn's hurried scrawl. He told me to keep looking. He said it wasn't over. The room around her felt distant, fading into the background as her mind reeled. William had met Evelyn. He had spoken to her before he died. And whatever he had told her, it had been enough to make her vanish. Henry and Porter stood in tense silence, their gazes locked on the photograph as if it held the answers they had been searching for. But it didn't. It only raised more questions. Margaret inhaled sharply, forcing herself to focus. If William met Evelyn, then he must have given her something. Something important enough to make them take her. Porter nodded, his jaw tight. That's what we need to find. Whatever she was looking at before she disappeared, whatever he led her to, it's still out there. Henry frowned, flipping through Evelyn's papers. She must have left a trail. No one investigates something like this without keeping records. Margaret stepped closer, scanning the pages spread across the desk. There were notes, redacted documents, timelines of events that stretched back decades. But one in particular caught her eye. A page filled with interconnected names, dates, locations. And at the center of it all, William Thompson. Her breath caught. She was building a web. Henry leaned in, eyes narrowing. It looks like she was trying to connect William to something bigger. Margaret's pulse quickened. But what? Porter traced his finger over the names, his expression darkening. These people, some of them are dead, some disappeared, and the ones who are still alive. His voice trailed off. Margaret swallowed hard. They're the ones who still have something to hide. Henry exhaled. If she was close to exposing them, then that's why she was taken. And if we're going to find her, we need to pick up where she left off. Margaret nodded, determination hardening in her chest. Then let's start with the names that are still alive. Porter hesitated, rubbing a hand over his jaw. There's one that stands out. He pointed to a name near the top of the page. Jonathan Reeves. Margaret frowned. Who is he? Porter's expression darkened. A man with too much power and not enough conscience. He was high up in intelligence during Project Seraphim. If anyone knows what really happened, it's him. Henry crossed his arms. And you think Evelyn was looking into him? Porter nodded. If she was following William's trail, it would have led her straight to Reeves. Margaret's heart pounded. Then that's where we go next. The address Porter provided led them to a towering estate on the outskirts of the city. Its gates high, its security tight. The kind of place built to keep people out, or in. Margaret sat in the car, staring up at the house, her fingers curled into fists. Everything about this place felt wrong. Too clean, too controlled. Henry exhaled, gripping the steering wheel. We're not getting in through the front door. Porter nodded. Then we find another way. Margaret swallowed hard. And if he won't talk? Porter's expression was grim. Then we find someone who will. The plan was simple. Get inside, find anything linking Reeves to Project Seraphim, and get out. But Margaret knew better than to believe it would be easy. They moved carefully, slipping past the perimeter under the cover of darkness. Porter led the way, his movements precise, practiced. Margaret followed, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had never done anything like this before, never imagined she would be here, breaking into a man's estate, searching for the truth her husband had died protecting. But she didn't hesitate, because this wasn't just about William anymore. This was about everything. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. The air was thick with the scent of leather and aged wood. the kind of place built on old money and secrets that had never been meant to surface. Porter gestured for them to split up, moving toward the study while Henry checked the hallway. Margaret hesitated for only a moment before following Porter. The study was lined with bookshelves, a massive desk sitting in the center, its surface pristine. But Porter ignored it, moving straight to the filing cabinets along the wall. He began searching through them, his movements quick, efficient. Margaret glanced around, her fingers trailing over the desk. Then she saw it. A small drawer, locked. Her breath caught. "Porter." He turned, following her gaze. "Can you open it?" Margaret hesitated before reaching for the handle. It didn't budge. Porter pulled a small tool from his pocket, working at the lock until it clicked open. He stepped back, letting Margaret pull it open. Inside there were papers, files, records. Margaret's breath caught as she lifted one of them. Her fingers trembled as she read the name at the top. Evelyn Carter. Her heart pounded. She was here. Porter took the file from her, scanning it quickly. His expression darkened. She was asking about Seraphim, about William, and they knew. Margaret's stomach twisted. Where is she now? Porter flipped through the pages. Then suddenly he stopped. His voice was tight. They transferred her. Margaret's hands clenched. To where? Porter looked up, his expression unreadable. A private facility. Off the grid. Henry appeared in the doorway. We need to move. Now. Margaret's pulse pounded. We found her location. Henry's gaze sharpened. Then let's go. They moved quickly, slipping back into the night, the stolen file tucked tightly against Margaret's chest. She barely felt the cold. She barely felt anything but the rush of adrenaline, the certainty that they were running out of time. Evelyn was alive, and if they didn't reach her soon, she might not be for much longer. The stolen file sat heavy in Margaret's lap as the car sped through the darkened streets. Her heart pounded with every passing second, each beat echoing in her ears like a countdown to something inevitable. They had found Evelyn Carter. They knew where she was. But the question remained, were they already too late? Henry's hands gripped the wheel with practiced control, his gaze locked onto the road ahead, while Porter sat beside him, flipping through the file again, scanning every detail. Margaret sat in the back, staring down at the pages, her fingers clutching the edge of the file so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Evelyn's name was stamped across several documents, reports of her movements, locations she had visited. And then, finally, an entry that made Margaret's blood run cold. Subject transferred to secondary site. Security level. Redacted. Clearance required. Margaret exhaled sharply. What does that mean? Security level? Redacted? Porter didn't look up. It means they don't want anyone to know where she is, or if she's still alive. A lump formed in Margaret's throat. They had come so far, unraveled so much, only to reach another dead end. But she refused to accept that. She leaned forward, eyes locked on Porter. You've been on the inside. You know how they operate. Where would they take her? Porter exhaled slowly, considering. If she was a threat, they wouldn't risk keeping her in a government facility. Too much paper trail. They'd put her somewhere private, somewhere off-record. A black site. Margaret's chest tightened. And how do we find it? Henry finally spoke, his voice low. We already have. Margaret's eyes snapped to him. What? Henry kept his gaze on the road, but his voice was steady. The last known location Evelyn visited was a private research facility outside the city. According to these records, she was picked up the same night she went there. Margaret frowned. So you think they took her back there? Porter nodded. It's possible. If she was getting too close, they would have wanted to control the situation as quickly as possible. Margaret clenched her hands. Then we go there. Now. Porter exchanged a glance with Henry. You sure about this? Margaret didn't hesitate. I didn't come this far to walk away now. Henry pressed harder on the gas. Then let's finish this. The research facility was hidden deep in the countryside, far from the city lights, surrounded by miles of empty roads and thick forest. It looked abandoned from the outside. An old industrial building, its windows dark, its metal exterior rusted with age. But Margaret knew better than to believe appearances. As they pulled to a stop a safe distance away, Porter lifted a pair of binoculars, scanning the perimeter. No guards outside. No cameras. Margaret's pulse quickened. Why does that feel like a bad sign? Porter lowered the binoculars. Because it is. Henry opened the glove compartment, pulling out a flashlight and a small device that Margaret didn't recognize. He caught her staring. Signal jammer. If there are alarms, this should give us a few minutes before they realize we're inside. Margaret inhaled deeply, steadying herself. The fear was there, pressing against her ribs, but she refused to let it take control. She had already lost too much to fear. Porter motioned for them to move, leading the way toward the side entrance. The air was thick with tension, the night quiet except for the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. Margaret's fingers grazed the edge of the file she carried, the weight of it a reminder of why they were here. At the door, Porter hesitated, checking for any signs of security measures. Finding none, he carefully pushed it open. It creaked softly, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor. The smell of stale air and disinfectant filled Margaret's nose as they stepped inside. Everything was silent, too silent. They moved carefully, scanning the walls for any clues, any signs of Evelyn. Most of the doors they passed were locked, their windows covered. Then, finally, Porter stopped, his gaze fixed on a small metal plaque beside one of the doors. Restricted access. Henry stepped forward, reaching for the handle. Locked. Porter pulled a thin tool from his pocket and worked at the lock, his movements precise. Within seconds, the door clicked open. He pushed it inward cautiously. Margaret's breath caught. The room was small, sterile, empty except for one thing. A chair sat in the center, its leather straps hanging loosely at its sides. Papers were scattered across a nearby desk, along with a small recording device. But the most chilling part was the security camera in the corner, its red light blinking. Someone had been watching. Margaret's stomach twisted. She was here. Porter moved toward the desk, scanning the papers. His expression darkened. These are interrogation notes. Margaret stepped closer, reading over his shoulder. Subject refused to disclose location of file. Continued resistance expected. Alternative measures authorized. Her breath hitched. They were trying to get information out of her. Henry scanned the floor, his jaw tightening. But she's not here now. Porter checked the recording device, pressing play. A crackle of static filled the air, followed by a faint voice. A woman's voice. Weak, tired. Evelyn, you can do whatever you want of me, but I won't give you what you want. A second voice responded, cold, detached. We already have what we need. Margaret's blood ran cold. The recording cut off. Henry turned sharply to Porter. They moved her. Porter's hands clenched. Then we need to find out where. Margaret felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. They had come so close. But Evelyn was still out of reach, still in danger. And now, whoever had taken her knew they were looking. She straightened, determination hardening in her chest. We don't stop. Not until we find her. Porter nodded. Then we start with this facility. Someone here knows where she is. Henry exhaled, glancing at the security camera in the corner. Then we better move fast. Because if they know we're here. A sharp noise cut through the silence. A door closing. Margaret's heart lurched. They were not alone.